Welcome to the very special 3-hour dissection of Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor Vivisection. This week,
I was going to make that same goddamn joke. we are not as creative as we think we are.
No.
I was going to say the same thing. From here on until August 26th, which is a day before my birthday. So anybody who wants to just send me a gift in advance, that's but from here until then, we will be doing nothing but McGregor versus Mayweather Vivisections.
That's right.
Every episode, 3 hours of breakdown of that amazing fight.
There are 1,000 different ways it could go. You know,
will this be like the highest selling? Will this fight have the largest disparity between buy rate and derision from hardcore fans of both sports?
Probably. I mean, because it's set up to be one of the highest selling pay-per-views ever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But both guys aren't even really universally liked or close to it in their own sports. No. And both guys come from sports that kind of hate each other. So it's going to be terrible. Everything about it.
So, yeah, there are still painters working outside my house constantly. I'm doing everything I can to distract my dog. In fact, I might just stick her in the bedroom for an hour, which I don't want to do, but
Zane lives inside the foundation of the Golden Gate Bridge in the 30s as well. So
that's right.
What's going on is by the time they get to one end, the painters have to just go back to the beginning and start painting again because by the time it dries, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The work is never ending.
It is a never-ending cycle, and I am. It feels that way because it's been like they started on last Friday, and every weekday they've been out here chipping and scraping and setting up and priming and all that, and it's not about to end either. So.
These men are taking the job seriously, Zane. All right.
It's true.
They're doing everything in their power to paint that goddamn house.
On a real note, we are here to talk about UFC Singapore, Holm versus Bethe Correia in the UFC's continuing how many underwhelming, overperforming cards can we run in a row special.
I think this one has just as much of a chance to be a surprisingly entertaining card based on the matchmaking. In some respects, it's a little stronger top to bottom than last weekend's card.
The main card is much stronger for 4 fights that all have meaning and
in terms of meaning for sure. But honestly, as far as action's concerned, I kind of knew looking even at that 6-fight main card last weekend, you kind of knew looking at those matchups that it was going to be fun. You had Volkanovski, Hirota, you had come on, who the hell else fought on that? You had Ben Nguyen versus Tim Elliott. You had every matchup running down was like an action fight that meant a little bit, and these are like non-action fights that mean a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Particularly the main event. It's hard to get excited for a Holm fight at this point. It really is.
It's true. The difference, I think, for me is just like the idea of with the last card, you had a whole bunch of fights that had to play out right to have meaning. And had to be Derek Brunson had to stop Dan Kelly quickly. Otherwise, you're getting the ugliest fight imaginable. This might have some ugly fights, but they're at least, I don't know. It feels like there's a little more brought to the table from the get-go in terms of.
I think they're very predictable ugly fights too, which means it'd be very easy to go pick up food or go to the bathroom or whatever. You know exactly when. If you have to miss a fight with this fight pass pacing, you know which ones to miss.
It's true. So we're going to dive right in because we've already spent enough time. Oh, God, Molly, just stop. Come on. For me. For me. She's walking slowly towards the door and looking at me as she does it with this, I'm going to go bark at this shit.
Toddler behavior. She knows you're watching.
Yeah. All right. So let's start out with a women's bantamweight bout at the bottom. Ji Young Kim versus Lucy Pudilova.
This is the Fight Pass card. We finally started building this division edition. That's the theme of this card. We've got new women's bantamweight. We have several new flyweights. Like, we have people actually building meaningless divisions. This is not a bad fight. Ji-Yeon Kim has some potential. She's a little wild when it comes to the striking, but she's certainly, yeah, a little wild. She's basically built, her striking is instinct and not skill per se. But she's certainly game enough to throw down on the feet. She doesn't tend to back down from a scrap. She's not like a terrible with her accuracy, and she throws in combination, which is certainly better than some beginner level strikers can say. Of course, her main bag is the ground game. She's a very solid grappler. It'll be an interesting test, I think, between her wrestling, which is largely based on a lot of the kind of stuff you tend to see in women's MMA, a lot of head arm throws and things. Be interesting to see how that works against the takedown defensive Pudilova. I thought Pudilova looked really solid, actually, in her fight with Lena Landsberg, especially if you were to compare that to their first fight, which took place in 2015. It was a huge improvement. Just 2 years later, she came in there and had, I thought, a case for beating Landsberg. Landsberg, at the end of the fight, certainly felt that Pudilova had done enough to win, as she talked with one of her eyes completely swollen shut. And Pudilova just showed a really nice jab. She showed extreme toughness, good conditioning. She kind of showed that I think she might be a good process-driven fighter for this division, just because she throws enough, she's accurate enough, and she can take a shot, which means she's got a good chance of winning rounds. I think that kind of stuff will be enough for her here against a little more reckless and wild Ji-Yeon Kim. So I'm going with Pudilova by decision.
Yeah, that's my feeling too. The big thing here is, as well, is that Ji-Yeon Kim, both to a fault, I would say, fights like a much better fighter than she is. You know? And that's the kind of thing you kind of want that out of a fighter. Like, you kind of want them to fight with you want them to fight with confidence. But with her, it's just like literally just standing in front of somebody and like walking them down with her hands down, being like, "What?" And then they start throwing punches, and then it's just this like wild, sloppy, nothing landing, clean brawl.
But I also consider it a good sign. I looked at her, I said she's raw, but she's game. And I think it's probably a lot better if you're a trainer to have a fighter who is way too confident in their abilities, and you have to like just let them get a loss and learn a lesson from it, than it is to have a fighter who really doubts themselves. And that does not seem to be Kim's problem.
It is. It's not bad confidence, excepting that like it can also be one of those things where you see people who fight like that and they develop habits that never go away, where especially they feel supremely defensively competent and confident when they're in really horrible positions.
Yeah.
And they will do things like constantly back out of the pocket with their hands down and just be like, "Oh, see, you can't hit me here. I'm on my way out."
Yeah, I would assume that in Kim's mind, being still undefeated is probably some of the cause for that, and that probably a loss would, I would hope, force her to reassess the way she trains.
Yeah, I'm going to pick this. I'm going to pick Pudilova here just through volume and toughness and grit. And Ji-Yeon Kim, she could show up as a much better athlete. That could be the big thing. This could be like a more polarized version of what we just saw with Chan Mi-jeon and JJ Aldrich.
Yeah.
Where Pudilova is even less athletic than Aldrich, and Chan Mi-jeon and Ji-Yeon Kim is a very good athlete who doesn't have a lot of fundamentals.
Yeah, Pudilova, her boxing has definitely improved and become a good weapon for her, but she's still hittable, and Kim does seem to have some real power in her hands.
Yeah, so there's a chance that we could see that. It just doesn't. I wouldn't pick it. I wouldn't pick Ji-Yeon Kim to be like a knockout puncher right now.
No, me neither. Or ever. I just think she has enough power that eventually she could use that, to her advantage, not necessarily being a knockout puncher, but she can crack. At least the way she throws her punches now, these big ropey haymakers, they definitely carry a little force.
Yep. So Pudilova she basically opened at -152. She opened at -120, but dropped really quickly to -152, and she stayed right about there, slowly moving closer in the odds as the fight comes up now at -139. Jeon Kim opening at -120, jumping up to +118, and now at +115. So that seems fair. Jeon Kim should be a slight underdog, but not a big underdog.
Yep, that works.
That brings us to a flyweight bout: Naoki Inoue versus Carl John de Thomas. And so Inoue she's it's Mizuki Inoue's brother. And
is he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's Mizuki Inoue's brother, and he fights a ton like her. Like it's the same. I kind of think of it as like pop-up boxing, where it's like a lot of really quick, jumpy movement that springs into a really fast combination with everything static, and then drops back out to like a lot of heavy movement.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
He's got this kind of pop-up boxing style and a reasonable but not well-articulated wrestling game. So a little bit of defense, a little bit of offense, but not actually like a lot of completion in either. And then a very crafty, hard-nosed, aggressive grappling game. And that should be enough to beat Carl John de Thomas, who just kind of looks like the best guy at MMA parts and MMA stuff on his circuit. Like he can wrestle a little, and offensively especially, he's not a great top player. He's not great. He's not a great submission grappler or ground and pound artist or anything like that. He can kickbox with some reasonable dedication. He gets a little wild when he tries to throw with power, but it's the basics of your standard MMA game, and it's just there's not a lot of highlight to it. So it's even if he takes Inoue down, I think he's going to get out grappled there. If he doesn't, if they stand and trade, de Thomas might land a couple of winging haymakers or some hard leg kicks, but Inoue's style of boxing it's made to really fluster somebody who doesn't have a deeper technical striking game. So I got Inoue here, probably by submission, I would guess. Maybe second round or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, and in a way, it bears mentioning that, again, I should say, new flyweights in the UFC is nice. 2 undefeated flyweights getting signed. I can never complain about that. Naoki Inoue does have one advantage that his sister Mizuki does not have, which is that she's a small strawweight. He is a very large flyweight. At 5'8" right now, I think he is the 3rd tallest flyweight on the roster. The only guys taller are Ulka Sasaki, who also fights in this card, who is, I don't know how he makes the flyweight limit, and Louis Smolka, who is just a beanpole, is 1 inch taller. So Inoue has a pretty remarkable height advantage over most people in this division. Interestingly, CJ de Thomas is only 1 inch shorter than him. So it may be a little bit of a flustering fight for Inoue. Fortunately for him, I think that he's not really at his best as a long fighter anyway. I think he really does his best as a tall man inside. He's got a pretty decent clinch game. Short clinch, but pretty good. He's got some good knees and uppercuts that he throws inside. He seems to be comfortable throwing those combinations, kind of picking people off. And he looks okay on defense, too. For a tall guy, he's at least aware of when a punch is coming at his head. He will pull or slip to evade it. This might sound strange. I think the game of CJ de Thomas, not the skill level, not the dynamism, but the game reminds me of like the bootleg Jose Aldo, where he's very, very patient. He likes the fight to be controlled. And kind of like also like Aldo's teammate Hawkran Diaz, he will really use his wrestling to control people if he doesn't have that on the feet. More of a grinder than anything, as you said, but he does have some decent takedowns, and he is happy. Seems to have good stamina. Both these guys have done 5-round fights, I think. And I know CJ de Thomas has, and he's very comfortable just holding someone for a long time. Doesn't seem to wear him out at all. And then on the feet, it's a lot of like waiting, chipping away with the low kicks, which are nothing like Aldo's, but they're okay. And then trying to explode with really, really ill intent on a counterpunch or a combination of counterpunches. I think that could be trouble for a tall fighter like Inoue. and certainly the wrestling could be a factor. But as you pointed out, Inoue is a very good, scrambly, aggressive submission grappler. And I think the fact that he throws volume on the feet is going to allow him to, provided he can take what CJ De Tomas throws back at him, is going to allow him to win the rounds. So I think De Tomas will survive, but I think that Inoue will win a decision.
Yeah, my worry as a flyweight, De Tomas's static top game is why I think there's a good chance to get submitted. Like,
yeah, that rarely works at flyweight.
Yeah. So odds on that fight: Inoue opening at minus 265, dropping and staying steady at around minus 280, 288 right now. De Tomas opening at plus 185, jumping up to plus 228, now at plus 232. The odds are a little long for two debuting flyweights. But I can easily see why Inoue is the favorite, and De Tomas, CJ De Tomas, his game just does not excite. It feels more like Cochran Diaz without the athleticism, which it's like really functional fundamental basics that
I think he does have some athleticism. He certainly likes none, but he likes flashy techniques. I think earlier in his career, like his first few fights, he was kind of trying to be like an Anthony Pettis, like just trying crazy shit, spinning attacks, jumping switch kicks. And I think he lost 2 fights to his name, Chris Augen. I know his name is Augen. He was a PXC champion, I believe, which is a very solid promotion out of Guam and in the Philippines. And he lost those 2 fights. And then I watched his first fight back, and they were remarking at how patient he was. So I think like that's sort of his adaptation to being a little too crazy, is to use that dynamism in bursts, which again, being sort of a neutralizer who explodes suddenly against a tall fighter who's very young, could surprise Inoue in this fight. I think that the fact that De Tomas' style isn't really pretty to watch all the time, is kind of slow, can be deceiving. And that it's probably, you can say he fights slow, but you can also say when he wins, it's because his opponents can't make the fight speed up,
Yeah, I just wondered too how much of it is about him being able to wrestle a little on a circuit where guys can't wrestle much.
Yeah, that probably has something to do with it.
All right, moving on. Bantamweight fight: Kwak versus Russell Doan.
I'm super into this fight. I think I'd probably call it like the 3rd best matchup on the card. After, let's see, I even did rankings. After the next one, Jingliang versus Frank Camacho.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we know it's the Leech.
Yeah, but also the matchup in that is going to be bananas with Frank Camacho. And then I would say Saffiedine dos Anjos, maybe a little more compelling. But this is a solid fight. Doan has rarely gotten a chance to shine in the UFC, but mostly it's because people just out-wrestle him. He's not a great defensive wrestler and a little too willing to grapple, although he did show some improvements, like in recent fights, at least trying to get up rather than playing guard, which is a nice sign. But his striking is very solid. And while he has been prone to periods of inactivity in the past, he's also started his past 2 or 3 fights really quickly and gotten some really good work done. He landed some solid shots on Mirsad Bektic. And then before that, I think he landed a bunch of solid shots on Pedro Munoz. Tends to be really aggressive, uses his length well, accurate, good combination punches. There are just some questions about how well he can maintain that down the stretch. And then Kwak is kind of the opposite. Tends to start a little slow, usually spends at least the first 3 minutes of the fight sort of getting his reads, and then sort of capitalizes on that as the fight continues. Good, dynamic, athletic fighter. Got some nice tricky kicks in his arsenal, good counter punches, and when he needs to, he will just march you down and throw combinations. The way his fight with Brett Johns started, you might have thought that it was going to be a wipeout, but Kwak did a really good job in that bout against a very top prospect. He scrambled back to his feet repeatedly and ended the fight landing some solid shots on Brett Johns' chin. So he's definitely a fighter to watch, and I feel like has kind of been overlooked because he got thrown in with Brett Johns right from the start. Both these guys are basically physically identical. I think it's the fact that Kwak is a little more composed down the stretch that is going to give him the edge here. Although I'm interested to see if Doan maybe tries to wrestle him, because he does have some decent takedowns, and Kwak has in the past spent some time being controlled on his back. So we'll see. I think it'll be a fun kickboxing bout for the most part, very tactical with some explosions of violence. How can you not like that? I'm going with Kwak by decision.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because it really is like Doan's problem is sort of that he's pretty decent. I guess he reminds me, like, I would then think of him as maybe a bit like I would pull back to like CJ Thomas, but with more athleticism and with a much better, cleaner boxing game, where it's just like he's pretty good at a lot of stuff, and then when it comes to really down, like push to shove against people who are really good at at those things, then he's not good enough. Like
he's kind of in like an Andrei Feely position.
Yeah, like he's a actually really pretty decent wrestler and grappler, but you put him in with Pedro Munhoz or with Mirsad Bektic, and he's not going to win those wrestling and grappling exchanges. He's just not. And he's a pretty good power punching boxer, but it's not so dominant that he's just been able to wreck a lot of guys there. He's been able to win fights that way, but Yuri Alcantara, Gerard Sanders, Pedro Munhoz, and Mirsad Bektic are all top athletes who have serious wrestling and grappling games. And Kwak is also a top athlete, but he doesn't have a wrestling game at all. Yep. So it makes this a tough fight to pick because I don't know that we know so much about how well Doan does down the stretch as much as we know how poorly he matches up against a certain type of fighter.
True. Although we have seen fights of his, like I'm thinking of who was the guy that Conor McGregor knocked out?
Marcus Brimage.
Marcus Brimage. That's the kind of fight I'm thinking of, where he gets mostly the striking battle he wants and just kind of loses steam, starts waiting way too long between exchanges, and kind of gives away the fight after a really solid first round.
But that also was 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's true. But it's hard to know because it's been like 4 straight losses since.
Exactly. It is hard to know. Like, it's hard to know, has he adjusted from that? Did we haven't gotten the chance to see. And so
we've seen him come out really aggressive to start, but is that just kind of like a Hail Mary thing for him where he knows he can't win the wrestling, so he's got to get a knockout? Or has he actually picked up the pace? Who knows?
And so with Kwak, he has never... He's been knocked out once in amateurs in 2013, early in his career. And otherwise, his loss to Brett Johns is his first one. And I would expect, hopefully, out of this, that loss to Brett Johns was a turning point for him. Because Korean Top Team, it's not a team full of guys who can't wrestle. It's full. There are some dudes who don't do that well with defense. It's not the most defensive team out there, but it's not just like these guys don't get how MMA works. So it may have been a good checkpoint for Kwak to come back around and improve his game off of that. And I have a little more faith in him making a leap. Like, he's 27. He's only been fighting for 4 years. He's a supremely gifted athlete, and he strikes with a ton of power.
Yeah.
So I have more faith in him making the leap, but Doan has never been stopped to strikes. He's never been knocked out. So it's going to be interesting. I could easily see this being a fairly even fight on the feet, where Doan turns to wrestling to try and turn the tide, and then the bout becomes a case of how well does Doan hold Kwak down, and does Kwak get more done on the feet standing as the fight goes on.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pick Kwak just because he seems like a tough fighter to break your 4-loss streak against, and it's really hard to know what parts of Doan's game to trust right now. How he's gonna look down the stretch against somebody who's probably gonna stick around with him, but.
Mhm.
It's an interesting fight. Like it's a really tough fight to pick, and it should be an action-packed fight because even if Doan doesn't go, only fights in bursts and only goes after Kwak hard early, Kwak isn't going to stop coming after him.
Yeah, and I think too what will be a deciding factor is that because Kwak is he's a calculated striker. But he's also just extremely fast. Like to me, that stands out more than his power. Is just how quickly he can get a foot or a fist to the target. He's very, very quick. I have my eye on him. I think like he really impressed me with that fight against Brett Johns. I'm hoping that we see him build on that and put together a nice career because I think he might be an overlooked but very valuable member of this growing and heatening up bantamweight division. Heatening up. What does that mean? This bantamweight division, which continues to heat up.
And I mean, like I said, the big thing that gives me hope is that he's had so little time, so little experience in MMA. Like his career is really just starting, whereas Doan's been around for a long enough time that you expect all the parts of his game that are going to be in place are in place by now.
Yeah, Kwak's a supreme athlete from a very credible team. So I think, it's fair to say he has a lot more potential than Doan.
Odds on this fight, Kwon Ho opening at -165, dropping down to -190, and then slowly, steadily rising all the way back up to -129. Russell Doan opening at +125, jumping up to +157, and slowly dropping all the way back down to +104. I have no problem with the closer to even these odds are, the fairer it is because, like I say, Doan's never been knocked out. Kwon Ho Kwak has some wrestling problems. Doan is the more well-rounded, prototypical MMA game. But Kwon Ho Kwak seems to be making leaps, and Doan's not winning fights lately. So
yeah, part of me feels like Kwak is worth a look at close odds. He's definitely the fighter with more potential, but Doan is very capable of turning that corner and turning in a crafty veteran type of performance that will.
It's not like Doan doesn't have a ton of speed and power. Like
no,
his game isn't deep. That's the bigger thing. Is that he gets a little predictable with his speed and power because he doesn't have a lot of other places to switch it up. He doesn't have a really great kicking game to go with it. He doesn't have a really crafty combination boxing game. He just throws a lot of heat.
Yeah,
and has pretty fast hands.
Yeah, but he's good at it. He's dangerous. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he were to rush out and while Kwak is still trying to get his legs under him, he gets caught cold. That would not shock me.
No. All right, that brings us to a welterweight bout, Li Jingliang versus Frank Camacho. And I get to talk first on this, which is lovely because I'm picking Frank. No, I'm
you can pick Frank. Frank's solid.
Is a treat. He is, because it's so obvious that he's a good athlete. He's not amazing, but he's a very good athlete who has had to entirely recraft his game upon reaching a new level of competition and has done so with absolute dedication.
Yeah, it's almost one of the best sort of strategic reinventions we've seen in recent memory.
Yeah, like the dude is called the Leech because he clung on to people. Like he was that guy who was in a scene with bad wrestlers and dominated by being a slightly better wrestler. Yeah, and he would get onto your back, he would get onto you any way he could, and he would drag you into this slow, grinding fight. And in the UFC, he couldn't do that. He didn't have the athleticism and the wrestling technique to be this amazing wrestling force in the UFC. And he's crafted himself into a technical boxer with power. And he's always had a great chin, and he's been able to depend on that to become a better boxer. I think that's probably a big part of it, is his durability has allowed him to take that time. That is probably also going to be the biggest thing against Frank Camacho, because Camacho is also a very solid, powerful boxer who obviously has a lot of veteran craft. Like, he spent a lot of time on a circuit where he's the really good striker, basically. And it's allowed him to become this crafty veteran with a pretty one-dimensional MMA game built around good body punching, combination boxing. He's kind of short-armed, stocky. Kind of feels like he's got a little, like, there feels like a bit of this sort of BJ Penn thing going on, where, like, when BJ was just really boxing mostly. And he's not as durable as Jingliang. He has been knocked out, and he's also kind of undersized for welterweight, or appears to be. And he's got a bigger, sort of longer, rangier, and equally as crafty boxer in front of him with power and a better chin, who I think also part of this is Camacho seems like he gets a little more predictable as the fight goes on, where, like, he'll start out and it's just like he's putting it on somebody and he looks slick and everything is well timed, and then as the fight goes on, he's still kind of in the same speed, throwing the same setups, throwing the same combinations. And even if he's still winning, he's not as effective because his opponent is getting reads on him and figuring out what he's doing. Whereas Jingliang is the opposite. He starts out with this sort of flighty, not really, landing anything that clean, not really sitting down on too much. And then as the fight goes on, he gets reads on you. He starts to mix things up. He starts to set up he starts to feint more. He starts to build behind the feints he was throwing earlier in the fight. And his boxing gets deeper and deeper as the fight goes on. And all that together has me picking him here.
Yeah, he's kind of Lee is sort of mentally a slow starter and physically a fast starter. He has sort of like that Tomas Almeida problem, where I think he likes to get the fight going. He gets his reads for the later rounds in the first early exchanges. But that means that they are risky. He tends to, if he's going to get hit and hurt, it happens in the first round, often in the first exchange. It's happened a few times. But he has been very durable and very composed. Like, he reacts very, very well to being hurt. And it is rare that somebody wins the first round from Li Jingliang without losing the second and third. And that was even the case in his loss against Keita Nakamura, where he was beating the pants off of Nakamura in the third round after losing the first, and then just got caught by a really good opportunistic submission artist. It was the case in this fight with Bobby Nash. It is worrying against a guy like Camacho that, Lee was hurt really, really badly by Bobby Nash. And Frank definitely has that power. I think 15 of his 20 wins have come by knockout.
Mm-hmm.
But he does not have the reach that Bobby Nash had. Yeah. Who had arms longer than Lee's, and Camacho is smaller than Lee, I think, by a decent margin. And the other thing is that where Lee gets composed when you hurt him, he has some of that Juan Manuel Marquez vibe going on, where it's like almost like when you hurt him is when the fight gets really dangerous for you. It tends to like zero him in, and he'll start looking for hurtful counters and will catch you as you're trying to hurt him, trying to pour it on. Camacho goes insane when he gets hurt. Or when he gets hit. Like, he can be a tactical fighter, but as soon as somebody hits him on the chin, he's a slugger. He is a brawler through and through and just goes to war. Anybody who has not watched Frank Camacho's fights, you owe it to yourself to watch them. I would recommend on his YouTube channel, he has his last fight in full against Gun Huan Park, which is one of the craziest wars I've ever seen. Absolutely bananas. Now, he won that war, but it was also a war against a 3-1 fighter. And I think that lack of discipline is going to be a problem against Lee. I really think that Camacho was very likely to stun Lee early in this fight and get into some messy exchanges. But I think as he starts to slow down a little bit, as Lee starts to get his reads, as provided he survives the first few big hits, I think Lee is going to start to outclass him down the stretch, just with better tactics.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, Frank Camacho is only 5'9" as a welterweight, whereas Lee is 6 foot.
Yeah, he's a little guy. He's small, stocky, powerful, and fast. But you know,
that Nash fight, that was very much Nash being huge and aggressive against somebody more technical than him, and it like, you know, it's like, yeah, if you hit hard and you're able to just pour it on somebody early, you can make some things happen.
Yeah,
if you, especially being that big and rangy. But
yeah, and I mean, it's even worth noting that if I recall correctly, when Lee got knocked down on a big left hook in the first round, it happened in an exchange in which he hit Nash with a really hard shot of his own and then got caught with the counter hook. So that is a problem for him. He's landing those shots early without necessarily being safe doing so, but you got to be able to take those shots if you want to hit him back.
Yeah, it shows in the future going forward that athleticism is always going to be a bit of a problem for Lee. Like, he's just not the world's best athlete, and guys who are really athletic and who can just get in there and really mix it up are going to be able to get something done with him.
Yeah.
And that's not Camacho, though. Camacho is, you know, probably a slight cut below Lee athletically.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and certainly smaller.
Yeah. All right, that brings us, the odds on that fight. Li Jingliang is a big favorite, opening at minus 405, dropping to 459, and pretty much staying there. He's at minus 440 right now. Camacho opening at plus 285, jumping up to plus 350, and he's at plus 335 now. So,
I mean, you know, I love the Leech more than anybody, but that does feel a little wide. Camacho is not a walkover opponent.
No, he's a good technical boxer with power, and he's going to get a boxing match.
Yeah, and even if it's a brawl, he's had a lot of them. You know, he's good in brawls.
Yeah.
So I think he deserves a shot there. What's Camacho by TKO?
Camacho by TKO is plus 560.
I mean, if you're going to bet on him, maybe. Might be the way.
Yeah. Jingliang's never not lost by knockout, though.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So maybe
Jingliang by knockout is plus 130.
That could be a bet as well. That's a way to bet on Lee at those odds.
Camacho has been knocked out several times.
It's going to be a crazy fight, though. It may be a little too risky to bet with any confidence. If you're going to bet on it, bet small, because it's probably going to be a war.
It'll probably be a back-and-forth war, and as long as Jingliang's chin holds up, I expect him to take over as the fight goes on.
Yeah, but we both think he's going to have to weather some kind of storm.
Yeah. All right, flyweight bout up next, Justin Scoggins versus Ulka Sasaki.
Is this you?
This is you.
Nope, this is me. Solid fight. I'm a little bummed that Justin Scoggins is going back to flyweight. Yeah. I thought that he seemed like he really wanted to move to bantamweight. He didn't like making this cut, and he had a really very impressive performance against Pedro Munoz, a fight he was winning, and then, you know, got caught in a guillotine by a guy who has proven to have probably bantamweight's best guillotine. So, you know, no shame in that. I thought he looked really solid, and it was just could have been a learning experience. Unfortunately, the lesson he seems to have taken away is that he has to be a flyweight. So it is what it is. But Scoggins was always solid as a flyweight. His game is more or less the same there. He may feel a little more drained, which can be a problem, but very nice, sort of fluid outside, almost like point fighting karate style of kickboxing, side kicks, long jabs. Like Stephen Thompson, he's also started to develop a really nice counter-punching game. He is not at all a bad boxer. And I think the sort of flashy kicks will get people thinking they have to close the distance, at which point Scoggins is very good at slipping or pulling a punch and coming back with some really sharp counters. And then you add into that the fact that he's got excellent timing on a nice double leg takedown and seems to just have a natural knack for transitions on the ground and between standing in the ground. The fact that he went in there and sort of out-transitioned Ray Borg in his fight with Borg says a lot. Borg is a phenomenal transitional grappler, and Scoggins kind of shut him down. He's got a dangerous opponent in Ulka Sasaki, who looked really solid against Wilson Hayes in his flyweight debut. I mean, if we're talking about guys that shouldn't be making the flyweight cut, you have to be worried about the health of Yuta Sasaki, because
that wasn't Sasaki's flyweight debut, but anyway.
Oh, he had a fight with Willie Gates before that?
Yep.
Yeah, but you got to be, I mean, Sasaki is what, like 5'11", 5'10"? He's a massive flyweight. He is gangly and long, but against Wilson Hayes, he really showed that he's learning to use that frame, which could be a big advantage for him in this division, because he was sticking a really nice counter right hand. He was working a jab. He stayed low, which is good for a guy with his height. He wasn't lofty and easy to hit. And even did a pretty good job at times of stopping Hayes' takedowns. Obviously, the wrestling was still the deciding factor in that fight that caused Sasaki to lose. But he also caught Hayes in a back mount at the end of the third round and put him in some trouble, threatened to choke, and landed some nice elbows as he was controlling the back. So definitely a guy who was sort of an unremarkable bantamweight seems to be turning into a flyweight to watch. I don't think those developments are going to be enough for the variation of the game of Justin Scoggins. Like, you get the sense that what's going to decide this fight is Scoggins' ability to transition from striking to wrestling like Hayes did. And Scoggins, unlike Hayes, doesn't tend to, he may not be quite as good of a takedown artist technically, but he doesn't need to get his takedowns working before his strikes will work. And that has always been the biggest problem for Wilson Hayes, is that, you know, he ended up outstriking Sasaki in that fight, but he had to get him down first. And that won't be the case for Scoggins, who will be comfortable from Sasaki's distance, using his kicks when Sasaki tries to punch. I think Scoggins is probably going to win I think a decision might be in the cards. If he uses his wrestling, I think Sasaki can probably survive on the ground. So I'm going to say Scoggins by unanimous decision.
Yeah, Scoggins, for all of his technical quality, is not a good finisher at the UFC level. That's actually the biggest problem for him as he bounces between bantamweight and flyweight, is that he really he came into the UFC as this impressive kickboxer who, and this is a great transition story as well. Scoggins came into the UFC as this impressive knockout artist kickboxer with this funky style and all this. And I remember scouting him when he came in, and I thought, the biggest thing that stood out to me is, like, I don't know that he can make this striking style work in the UFC in the way that he's accustomed to having it work. Like, that may be a continual impediment for him as he travels up the divisions. And it kind of has been. Like, as you note, his technical striking has gotten better. He's a better counter puncher. He's, put more tricks in to his trade. But he's still not a power puncher. He still doesn't have any power to his striking. And it has been both, like, the blessing there is that he's become a very, very good wrestler. He's a better wrestler than he is anything else, frankly. But the downside is, too, that as a wrestler, he's also not the most submission-aware fighter in the world. And, I've talked about fighters having an unchokable neck before. Scoggins has the opposite. He has a very long, thin neck that is right out there to be choked by people.
Submission grapplers look at Justin Scoggins, and as if in a mirage, his neck turns into a chicken thigh.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just a tasty target for those submission artists.
Fortunately for him, Sasaki is a back take artist when it comes to his grappling game. He is a back take. He takes the back well and gets rear naked chokes. He's got a bunch of them. But Scoggins' transition wrestling ride game is superb. Like, Scoggins is not a dude who gives up his back a lot. That is not a big problem. And as such, like, I think the big thing for him here is just going to be that, Sasaki may start out competitive with Scoggins, because Scoggins is the better technical striker, but he doesn't have power, and Sasaki can, use his speed and his range to sit down and make Scoggins work a little more than he wants to. But once Scoggins gets his wrestling game going, it'll probably break down most of Sasaki's game, I would say, and allow him to really take over and win the fight everywhere. The only thing that really, I got to mention this because I was watching the tape again and I immediately just wanted to like yell at the screen, was Sasaki in that fight with Wilson Hayes. He comes out and he's got this perfect low, rangy stance. And Joe Rogan can't stop talking about how Sasaki is compromising his height and reach advantage by fighting low.
My gosh.
And I'm just like, oh, God.
That never stops bugging me. When you see so many tall fighters get low and suddenly realize how much easier it is to maintain distance and not get hit on the chin. And here's Joe Rogan being like, no, do the BJ Penn. Stand on your tippy toes so you're as tall as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's just like,
I liked that about. Especially because I just complimented that aspect of his performance before.
Yeah,
I think it was a good sign.
Exactly how he should fight, and it's going to give him a better chance against Scoggins because Sasaki actually throws really good straight shots with some power. Like he's got more. It's not even power. He's got a lot of speed and accuracy.
He's got snap. Like it doesn't. They don't thud when they hit, but like he will definitely pop your head back if he hits you.
Yeah, and that'll probably serve him pretty well early against Scoggins. It's just it's something that is going to, it kind of goes away as the fight goes on if people can break down his boxing game by out wrestling him and forcing him to think about it.
Maybe who knows? Maybe Scoggins doesn't react well to being taunted. Maybe Sasaki will have an effect because he was really braggadocious in that Hayes fight, like we've never seen. He was a little Diaz, so.
That'd be if that happens and Scoggins just decides to have a pure kickboxing bout with Ulka Sasaki, that would be fun as hell.
It's worth a try.
It is. Scoggins is coming in as a big favorite, opening at minus 555, jumping up to minus 421, and evening out at minus 518. And Sasaki he's opened at plus 365, dropped to plus 313, and has jumped right back up and is out at plus 387 right now. Pretty much evened out. I frankly think that that's a little too wide. I expect Scoggins to win this fight, but like I said, Scoggins is not a finisher. He just is not at the UFC level. And I don't think he will be because his style of footwork and his style of kickboxing tends to take a lot of snap off of his strikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a finisher. Has a tendency to get submitted in there against a good submission finisher. There's definitely a window for Sasaki.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on Sasaki, but I think the odds are overly wide given Scoggins' struggles to maintain consistent form.
Agreed.
Let's see. That brings us now to featherweight bout: Alex Caceres, Rolando Die.
I think it's D.
Or Rolando D. And this fight gives me fits.
Yeah.
Frankly. Because obviously, if you look at this as a casual fan, you just see Alex Caceres against some dude, and it's like, okay, Caceres is going to walk away with this. He's got it. No problem. Then you actually look at the fights Caceres has had lately, and you actually look at Rolando D and how he fights. And this is a toss-up. Like, I'm picking Caceres because he's been there before. He has fought on the stage before, and he is a crafty striker. He is unpredictable, and he's good at cutting angles and, being funky and showing people looks they haven't seen before. He is not a good, consistent fighter, though. And the thing is, too, as time has gone on, he has removed pretty much everything other than kickboxing from his MMA game. I mean, he's never been a fighter to really go after people wrestling-wise. He's always been more the guy that if you take him down, he will grapple with you. But he still used to have, some wrestling in his game. And lately, he's just there. He's there to kickbox with you. And if he can be funky and make you second guess yourself and make you kind of just fade away and watch him, then he's really good. If he cannot make you do that, then he gets hit a lot and he's inconsistent and irritable, and he's doesn't necessarily have the gas tank to maintain the hard fight that he wants to press. We've seen him fade several times badly in fights. And Rolando D is just a beastly, powerful, nuts and bolts kickboxer. Like, super powerful kicking game, heavy hitter, not always the most active fighter, more willing to clinch than he is great in the clinch, but really good elbows. Like, he's great at separation strikes in the clinch. He's just not good at controlling the clinch. So it's like if you clinch with him a lot, he'll land some hard elbows, some hard knees, but he doesn't have that Matt Brown, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, I can break you down with my clinch game. It's just he throws some power in there. And he's just a consistent round to round, slow paced power punching beast who hits hard as hell. And he doesn't have the most complicated wrestling defense in the world. If you get in and make your shot, make him work a little on a takedown, he'll give it up. But I don't think he's, let's see, I can't remember now if he's ever been submitted.
He was submitted in his second pro fight.
Okay, he's submitted in his second pro fight. He has not been submitted since then. And he's powerful and athletic and looks like he could improve a lot if he just keeps working on his wrestling defense. Like, this is somebody that if he can just kind of figure out how to be Jeremy Stevens, then he could be Jeremy Stevens.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if Alex Caceres just kind of floats through this and fades or lets himself get cracked hard by shots coming back at him, then there's every chance he drops this fight. You're basically betting on Caceres being the guy who shows up, who has been there before and can slip enough strikes per round while landing to win. So
picking Caceres means expecting a specific thing from Caceres, and that has always been the problem.
So I don't know. I might actually just take a chance on Rolando Die here. I'll you know what? Screw it. I'll pick Die. Or Rolando D. I'll pick him just because I don't have any faith in Caceres to take a consistent round-to-round approach to winning a fight.
Yeah, I think that's not unfair at all. D is a very good athlete with a you even said like a nuts and bolts game, but D is actually the guy I was thinking of before when I was talking about CJ Tomas. I mixed them up, but D is the guy who reminded me of an Anthony Pettis really early in his career.
Yeah.
He still has those surprising kicks and spins and weird
that
flying
makes a lot
techniques.
more sense as to what you were talking about with CJ Tomas, where I was like,
I just got the two explosive PXC strikers mixed up in my head.
okay.
D, so it was D who had the two losses to Kyle Ogden, who is a solid wrestler. He is the guy in this scene who, every regional scene has that. We talk about the guys who have okay wrestling, but most big scenes have one guy who's actually a very good wrestler and not very good at anything else. Yeah. Like in like the UK circuit, there's like Ali Arish, and here in like PXC and URCC, you've got Kyle Ogden, big lanky guy who goes in there and grinds on people. And he had two split decision losses to Ogden, one of them a 5-rounder for the PXC title, and that was what prompted D to change his style up. So I think it's probably ultimately a very good thing for him that he had those two losses, because imagine if Anthony Pettis had, like the Eddie Alvarez fight or the Clay Guida fight when he was 23. may have had a lot more time to start making adjustments and to resolve those issues, not being so dominant with just his dynamic style. And so D is not necessarily picked up a lot of like interstitial tactics, but he has learned patience. He has learned to pick his shots and try to maintain distance. And the onus then is on Caceres in this fight to put the pace on him. That is how Caceres wins. He has done that in recent fights in particular. You said he's mostly a kickboxer, and that's what he's most comfortable doing. It's probably what he would be best advised to do here, is just to come out, throw a lot of strikes, be creative, be unorthodox, throw combinations, throw kicks, make D work and outwork him. I am going to pick Caceres to do that. I think that D's very slow-paced style will be an issue, but we know that D has adopted his slow-paced style as an adaptation. We know that he has crazy dynamism in him because we've seen it in some of his past fights, and even one of his recent ones, he got a 23-second knockout over a solid undefeated Japanese fighter. So, yeah, Caceres is on thin ice here. It'll be a risky fight for him. I think just the experience and volume are going to be the deciders, but I would not at all be surprised if you're right. D, I think, has some real potential.
Yeah, I just, it's like when, obviously Jason Knight is a very different fighter.
Yeah.
But it's still this sort of feeling of like Caceres, going into that fight, it's just like, can I trust him to show up and like really fight hard against somebody for 3 rounds who's going to be throwing back at him? Not that much.
The thing is like, he can do it. He had the Rodriguez fight, very back and forth, 5 rounds against a guy who was doing all the same shit right back at him at a higher clip. And Caceres did it, but sometimes he doesn't. Like, you have that, you have 5 rounds of relative brilliance from Caceres there, and then you have the 3rd round against Cole Miller.
Yeah.
And it's like, which guy is going to show up?
Yeah. I'm really, or, his fight with Masanori Kanehara, where I realize Kanehara is like good. He's much better than he gets credit for.
Underrated for sure. But
Caceres just didn't, I thought he was sick. Like,
yeah, the problem wasn't that Kanehara beat him. It's that Kanehara had his way with Caceres.
Yeah. I was just like, is Caceres like, does he have food poisoning? What is going on in this fight?
It smelled like one of those like, oh, I had the flu performances, and I don't think it was. It was just that's Alex Caceres.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm gonna take a flyer on D to show up and really put on a shocking performance and get a big win against somebody who's not going to try to take him down and is going to try and outflash him.
Yeah, it would be a solid win, and it's certainly possible.
It's an upset because Caceres is still technical. Like he actually, like, the biggest advantage to me in Caceres' game, or the biggest advancement he's made, is that he's become much better at cutting angles on like in and out of combinations.
Yeah, his kicks have improved as well. He's got some really powerful round kicks, like nice body kicks. We've seen in his past few fights.
Yeah,
but it's like you just can never expect a straight line in the progression of Alex Caceres. I love him, man. He's always fun to watch, but inconsistent. That is the byword with him.
Yeah, I remember hearing that he, like, they're talking about like, oh well, BJ Penn beat Alex Caceres a bunch in the gym. He's ready, and I was like, that is not the gold standard I would use to measure.
That's the thing. Caceres
for Yair Rodriguez.
Caceres had a great performance against Rodriguez. He did really well against Uriah Faber in 2014. He has had these moments where you're like, wow, this guy's really good. And I don't even think it's just the chin. Like, his chin isn't the best, but sometimes he just it doesn't have to get tested for him to turn off sometimes.
All right. Caceres opened at -275, is now to -303. Rolando D opened at +195, is slowly moving out to +240 after a brief jump up to +230. I think those odds are too wide, frankly, at least based on scouting. I mean, I realize that Caceres has all the experience and name value here, but I don't trust him to show up. I mean, I think he should be the favorite, absolutely, unquestionably. But
Yeah,
300?
I'm with you. Yeah, that feels. I would never put Alex Caceres at those odds, to be honest.
Yeah.
Hey, whatever happened to Kyung Ho Kang?
Who? Oh, Kyung Ho Kang?
Yeah, the Korean fighter.
Yeah, he's in his military service.
Oh, I just saw, looking at Caceres' record, I was like, he was really fun. He's not fought since 2014. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it.
Damn that compulsory military service.
So I am picking Rolando D mostly just because I don't trust the right Caceres to show up, and wins over Cole Miller and Mazio Fullen do not give me a lot of faith because Rolando D is a much more powerful athlete than either of them.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us next to Cyril Asker versus Walt Harris. This is you.
Not a super meaningful fight, although I do have my eye on Walt Harris. I think he has a lot of potential as a heavyweight. I think he's 33 or something like that, so he's not super young, but
yeah, he's 34. He looks young.
He certainly looks young, and he's very inexperienced, still has that youthful athleticism. I would say he's easily one of the most athletic guys in this division. Very quick, good stamina, huge power, basically every metric of athleticism. For a guy who weighs like 250, Walt Harris is exceptionally high on all of those, by all those metrics. Cyril Asker is pretty much exactly the opposite. He looks like a regional heavyweight. He's like kind of small for the division, kind of doughy, kind of slow, not a bad fighter. And he really showed in his fight with Dmitry Smolyakov that the performance he had in his debut, getting instant knocked out by Jared Cannonier, is not necessarily what will happen to him in the UFC. He's tough generally. He keeps a nice steady pace. He's got a little bit of that Dan Kelly going on, that when he gets going, he can just chip away. And he's got, for some reason, they were really shocked in that fight when Asker took Smolyakov down because Smolyakov was the wrestler, but that's kind of Asker's game.
Smolyakov, to Smolyakov's extreme discredit, he's a wrestling coach for like one of the bigger Polish camps.
Yeah.
So it may be Asker's game, but that's still really like a really bad look for.
It's not a good sign. Yeah. But that is Asker's thing. Like it's not surprising that he would go for it, and he has a lot of his fights end up with him in mount. Not against the best competition, but he's all right on top. A very meat and potatoes sort of top game. I expect Walt Harris to just kind of blitz him here. Harris moves a lot, moves really well, covers distance really quickly. He's getting harder and harder to hit with each passing fight and doesn't seem to freak out as much as he used to when he does get touched. And the knockout he produced against Chase Sherman was, people don't talk about it, but it was one for the ages, man. Like, it was a beautiful knockout. The technique, the speed, the power, it was terrifying to behold. I think it was like a knee right into a right hand off the same side, instant knockdown. Yeah, just Walt Harris is capable of some crazy violence, and I think that's what we're going to get in this fight. So I'm taking Harris by first round KO.
Yeah, the thing about the Asker win over Smolyakov is it felt more to me exposing of Dmitry Smolyakov than it did indicative of Cyril Asker's ceiling. Because
further, I would say even just further exposing after Smolyakov's fight with Luis Enrique.
Yeah, because Smolyakov, I mean, to me, it was the read on him before that was like his cardio is bad. And as long as his cardio is bad, he's going to have problems. The Cyril Asker loss was, okay, he's just not set up to fight people who can actually come after him at all. Walt Harris, the thing is, Asker, like him having to wrestle Smolyakov, it really kind of tells me that all of the parts of his game have to be functional for him to win. Because he's not a terrible boxer. He's a pretty good offensive boxer, but he's got that huge head that even if he got a bunch of head movement, it would be hard for him to move that head enough for him to not get hit. And the combination of massive head hit ability and having to get takedowns to win fights has me feeling like Harris's footwork and movement and long, straight snapping punches and improved comfort should have him winning, and probably by knockout at some point.
Somehow I knew, Zane, you were going to talk about the size of Asker's head.
It's huge.
I take it as a subtle jab at me. I also have trouble fitting into most hats, so
your head is not Cyril Asker big though.
No, it's just my body's even bigger. That's all.
Cyril Asker, he's got the Bigfoot head going on.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Where like there's no amount of head movement he could learn to stop himself from getting hit in the head.
In that Shia LaBeouf music video, all of the dancers with the big they have big paper mache Shia LaBeouf heads. Okay. That's how Cyril Asker looks. He has like a paper mache copy of his own head that is like 3 times the size, and he just wears it into his fights.
He does. So yeah, I got to pick Walt Harris here in this as well.
Paper mache does not hold up to trauma very well. It's got to be said.
Harris opened at -215, dropped to -296, is out at -339. Asker opened at +165, has drifted up to +267. I think those odds are wide for heavyweights who should never really be beyond ±200. Both Harris and Asker have lost plenty enough to tell me that neither super safe picks, but Harris should have this.
At the same time, you get it, right? You look at the fight, you look at those odds, they make sense.
Yeah, I get it. Heavyweight, it should never be like that sure of a thing.
Yeah, I get it.
All right, that brings us to a lightweight bout. Takanori Gomi versus John Tuck. Tuck's going to knock Gomi out. I'm going to feel really sad about it. That's all I got to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, of all the fights that Gomi has had where he gets now just blown up consistently in the first round, this is the best one for him. Tuck is quite inconsistent and definitely somebody who fades down the stretch. And Gomi has never had an issue with that. Even when he's gassed, he keeps throwing and can put out some decent volume. So if Tuck does wear out, Gomi could do to him some of what Damian Brown did, just a lot uglier and a lot more aggressively. But, doesn't seem like Gomi can even take a stiff breeze to the chin anymore. He's certainly, we were talking about this before the show, but like of the 2 guys in this card who get knocked out all the time, Arlovski and Gomi, it's more like run of the course for Arlovski. In fact, it may be why he doesn't seem any less durable than he has been, because he just gets knocked out the first time he gets hit in most fights. Gomi has had a Chuck Liddell sort of career progression here at the end of his life as a fighter, because he was a guy who was renowned for being extremely tough and has now just been knocked out by like single shots or overwhelmed with little flurries on the ground. Not that the Joe Lozon flurry was little. Joe Lozon brutalized him, but Gomi did nothing to fight back. And for a guy who used to be a pretty decent wrestler, who doesn't seem to really wrestle that well anymore, doesn't seem to carry that much power anymore. He's 39 years old, so it's obvious that the speed is going, and with the chin as well. He's still a guy with a lot of experience who's extremely game, and you can't count him out against a guy like John Tuck. This is one of those fights where if Gomi loses here...
You are making me so fucking sad right now.
It's one of those fights where if Gomi loses here, it'll be the worst loss of his career. You know what I mean? It'll be the worst guy. No disrespect to John Tuck, but he is not on the level of the Jim Millers, Joe Lozons, even the Miles Juries of the world. And so...
Well, he lost a split decision to some guy named Sergei Golayev in Sengoku way back in the day.
Who's that? Gomi did?
Gomi did. But otherwise, yes.
Since he was renowned as the best lightweight in the world, it'll be his worst loss.
No, that was after he was renowned as the best.
Was it really?
Yeah, that was right on the back. That was when he was the best lightweight in the world. And
so that should make you feel better, right? As a Gomi fan, it'll only be his second worst loss, and it could be a credible win if he gets it. I don't think he will. I agree. I think Tuck is going to. I actually think Tuck is going to submit him. I think Tuck will knock him down and then jump on his back.
I don't think there'll be a reason to submit him. I think he'll be out cold before any submission necessaries.
Could be. I don't think he'll go out quite that easily, but I do know that Tuck is a very good back take, very good submission game. I think he's the kind of guy.
So melted in the first round of every one of his last 3 fights.
Well, but he got pounded out by Miller and Lozon. You know what I mean?
Even still, it was more the ref didn't stop it quickly enough than he got pounded out.
I just think that knowing MMA, refs usually like to see the follow-up to see if someone's done. I have a feeling that if Tuck knocks Gomi down, he's the kind of guy to jump on his neck rather than flurrying. So
maybe. It just makes me sad as shit.
That's how I feel about the Arlovski fight coming up later, because he was like my first favorite fighter. And so now I get to watch eventually in MMA and combat sports in general, you just get to watch your heroes get cannibalized by all these stupid other fighters who grew up watching them.
Gomi opened at -300, went up to -242, is back down at -297. Tuck opened at -300 rather. Went up -242, is back down at -297. Gomi up at +220 and dropped down to +190, is back up to +236. Frankly, this should be more in the ±5 to 600 range to me. I know Tuck is not a good consistent performer, but there is no reason to think that Gomi is winning this fight.
I think they're okay just because it is Tuck, and I have a lot of trouble putting John Tuck at +500 odds over anybody, but
maybe. But Gomi getting a win, Gomi, this would just be like the way he's fought lately. It would be pretty remarkable.
We can hope, but he certainly we can agree he's got a better chance here than in any of his last 3 fights.
Sure, he's got a better chance here than any of his last 3 fights, but the story of his last 3 fights is that he should have been at -1 or +1,000 odds.
Yeah, no, even wider because they were all very succinct finishes.
Yeah. That brings us to a welterweight bout: Tarec Saffiedine versus Rafael dos Anjos. Take it away.
Love this fight. I'm very excited to see Rafael dos Anjos make his welterweight debut. If the rumors are true, dos Anjos walked around as a lightweight at like 190. And he said, I believe in an interview recently, maybe with MMA Fighting, he was talking about, like passing out in the bathtub and having to like be unconscious for 3 minutes on the bed before his fight with Eddie Alvarez. Just terrible stories of his weight cut. And he said that right now he's 200 pounds. So he's a thick dude. He's a solid muscular guy. I think he probably has for a long time walked around way, way over 155. And it is a testament to his remarkable discipline and toughness, his mental toughness, that he was able to make that cut for so long. I hope that it's not too late for him. I don't feel like it is. I thought he still has put in some really good performances lately. At welterweight, he's going to look a little faster. I think he's going to feel stronger. I'm expecting a Rafael dos Anjos who has an easier time putting pressure on people. And that is a scary prospect because Rafael dos Anjos remains one of the very best pressure fighters in all of MMA. Tarec Saffiedine, I think, is a really a well-chosen first test for him in this division. Saffiedine's been up and down more than up lately. I think he's lost 3 of his last 4, but has very rarely been blown out. Even his fight with Rory McDonald, in which he was KO'd, was competitive in the first 2 rounds. He is a very crafty fighter, not a very good finisher, which has been a problem for him, but good footwork, good distance management. One of the few guys who I think is, even without having like the crazy mid-combination stance switching style of somebody like TJ Dillashaw, Saffiedine is probably even more than that, truly comfortable in both stances, where he can box and defend. That's, I think, often the hardest thing is when you switch stance, you suddenly realize you don't know how to defend anything. All of like the flow chart in your head is just flipped. And it's like, I don't know if anyone's had this experience. If you play like a lot of a fighting game with somebody and you just play the same controllers every time, and then you switch and suddenly you're on the right side of the screen instead of the left, it really fucks you up. And that, I think, should tell you how difficult it is to do what Saffiedine does, which is maintain his defensive responsibility, keep his jab working, set up his kicks equally well from both stances.
I think that actually really brutally undersells how difficult what Saffiedine does is. Like,
imagine that moment of panic when you're playing Tekken, when you're suddenly on the right side of the screen, except you're actually being punched in the face.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why I say that fighting is not like chess. Fighting is like speed chess plus violence, because you have to make all these smart decisions under the most intense pressure in sports. Saffiedine has, however, struggled to like keep people out of the clinch, keep his back off the fence against really aggressive fighters. And I think most telling was his fight with Rick Story, who is a southpaw who comes forward, attacks the body, very similar to Dos Anjos, except that Dos Anjos, I think, is much quicker than Story, and probably a more consistent takedown artist as well when he ties up with people. We'll see how well that'll work against Saffiedine, who is a solid wrestler and, again, a natural welterweight. But I think Dos Anjos kind of is too. I think we'll have some dicey moments in the first round, but I think that eventually Dos Anjos is going to start ramping up that pressure and take Saffiedine out of the fight in the later rounds. I do want to say, before we move on, or before you make your pick, Zane, that Dos Anjos had really, really good stamina at lightweight. And the idea of Dos Anjos maybe having had those fights, like the Pettis fight, even the Ferguson fight, and have been worrying about his conditioning because of the weight cut, the idea that that weight will be lifted from his shoulders, literally, at welterweight, is a really tempting prospect. Because this guy, even though he lost, he went 5 hard rounds with Tony Ferguson in Mexico City and looked like he could have done a 6th. He still looked like he was in fighting form. So we're talking about a great, hardworking athlete who was a terrifying force as champion. I'm really, really hoping he can make something happen at welterweight.
Yeah, I unfortunately, one of the things I've learned really heavily, and I've had to learn this lesson a lot over the years of trying to analyze fights, is literally fucking never bet on how a fighter will look when they change weight classes.
Yeah.
Just never. Some dudes, it's like night and day. You just pulled back a curtain and they are a totally different fighter. Some dudes are the exact same with all their exact same problems. They're still the slowest guy in the they're still the slowest guy in the division. They still don't have punching power. They still whatever, makes no difference at all. And some people, they just find these really weird things that they suddenly can't do, or parts of their game that don't work in ways that have always worked.
Yeah. So we've got Dustin Poirier for Class A. We've got Joshua Berkman for Class B. And then we've got, maybe Anthony Johnson would be better for Class A. But then we've got
you've got Henan Barao for Class C.
I thought Barao looked good as a featherweight, actually.
Yeah, but his blitzing striking style, like a lot of what ended up being really great for him as a featherweight was his wrestling and grappling game. And a lot of what stopped working was his blitzing striking style.
Hard to say how much of that was the weight change and how much was the 2 Dillashaw fights. Because even at bantamweight, he looked really bad.
This is true.
After the first Dillashaw fight, when he took on guy with the French name, starts with the
Mitch Gagnon.
Mitch Gagnon, yeah. So
it's fair.
So then maybe Alexander Yakovlev, guy who looks really bad in the new weight class. Not a big name example, but that's the one that comes to mind.
There are all sorts of examples out there. You can pick and choose. It's almost impossible to tell how changing a weight class is going to affect a fighter.
Yeah.
I do think the big thing with Saffiedine, honestly, is he's not technically bad anywhere, but he's actually just kind of really inconsistent moment to moment as either an offensive or defensive fighter.
Yeah.
Like he can hurt somebody and drill them with a hard shot, or land crushing leg and body kicks, and then he'll just kind of switch off and coast and let them back in and go back to something else entirely and go totally away from whatever was working. I mean, there's a reason for a dude who's as technical and big and muscly as he is. Like, he's not a really underpowered welterweight. That's not it. But there's a reason that he has had 1 knockout win since in his entire career. One knockout win in his entire career.
Yeah. I'll tell you what my read on Saffiedine is. I don't think he's coasting. I think he strikes me as a guy who thinks too much.
Yeah.
Like we know he's a very cerebral fighter. They call him the sponge. He strikes me as a guy who in the gym picks up new ideas at a remarkable rate. But when the pressure's on in the fight, I think he gets into his own head.
Yeah, that may be more what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's not like he's running out of ideas. It's like he's the sponge. He has too many ideas and can't pick one.
And so offensively, you see that problem where he won't stick with things that work, or the things that he will stick with that work are things that are just sort of picking at somebody and throwing little leg kicks and staying at distance and being elusive, while he tries to figure out what of his many techniques he wants to set up and actually depend on. And then defensively, it's kind of the same thing, where like you see him be slick and cut angles and be on the counter and be really sharp. And then you also see Dong Young Kim march him down and just wing some shit at him and club him a few times. And he's as inconsistent about responding to pressure and responding to offense as he is inconsistent creating offense and being aggressive and going after people.
I'll tell you what, though, when he was fighting Kim, I think that speaks to the idea of Saffiedine as an overthinker too, because when Kim was just coming at him, throwing crazily, it was trained instinct from Saffiedine. And the first 2 minutes of that fight were like Sean Pearson versus Matt Riddle. Like he was just clubbing Kim with counter jabs every single time he came in. But then Kim ties him up, gives him some time to think. And I think that
Saffiedine tied Kim up.
Yeah, that too. Like that's the same kind of thing. Like he's like, oh, I'll try this. Like this is the thing that'll surprise him. It's just like too much stuff buzzing around in his head. I get the sense that, as weird as it may seem, as perfect as a pair as they might seem to be, that maybe somebody like Firas Zahabi is not the right person to bring the best out of Tarec Saffiedine, because he is a very cerebral coach. And maybe Saffiedine would be better with somebody like Rafael Cordero, who's just going to like give him confidence and tell him to go get blood. And let him be a doer, so he doesn't get hung up on his own strategies.
Yeah, maybe even somebody like Henry Hooft, who's just going to berate him for screwing around and tell him to like stick to technical basics.
And that might actually work for somebody like Saffiedine. Just have somebody to like shout at him and do the thinking for him.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's kind of why like elite Saffiedine doesn't have very many wins over elite fighters who can produce consistent offense. You know, he may not even have any. Like the best win of his career is Nate Marquardt.
Yeah. It's kind of in the UFC in particular. It's kind of just looked like people who just kind of keep coming and keep giving him things to respond to. He just kind of gives them the fight. He makes mistakes or freezes up and gives the fight away.
And Rafael dos Anjos is going to come after him and going to keep coming. And you can't be like, oh, you know, Rafael, he got knocked out by Eddie Alvarez. He has only been otherwise knocked out by Jeremy Stevens in 2008. And Saffiedine is
he's definitely tough. He's definitely durable. Eddie Alvarez landed a perfect right hand as dos Anjos was throwing. He can take a shot. And Saffiedine is maybe not even as powerful as Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah. So it seems very well made for Rafael dos Anjos to have a very good difficult welterweight introduction that he should win, because he can keep coming after Saffiedine everywhere.
Yeah.
Dos Anjos is the favorite, opening at -195, dropping down to -400. And picking slowly back up to level out at about -279.
I feel like I only want to see Dos Anjos fight mid-tier welterweights, because like all the most fun matchups. Can you imagine like Dos Anjos versus Ponzinibbio? That'd be amazing. That'd be an amazing fight. Dos Anjos versus Zach Cummings, right? Versus like even Alan Jouban would give him a good fight versus Nordine Taleb.
Those would all be great fights.
Yeah. Gunnar Nelson. I want to see him against those like lower top 10, top 15 guys.
Yep. Saffiedine opened at +155, spiked up to +300, and has drifted back down to +223. Those odds could honestly be a little longer for me. Dos Anjos is incredibly tough to finish. Saffiedine is no kind of finisher, and in a consistent 3-round fight, it's hard for me to give Saffiedine an edge. Your mic just...
Oop, I'm here.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't touch anything.
I think that's fair. I agree with you.
That brings us to a welterweight bout: Dong Young Kim versus Colby Covington. This should be a really fun fight, and I'm going to pick Colby Covington here because I think it is one of the rare young sort of up and coming fighters who really has the right style to beat Dong Young Kim. Like Dong Young Kim, he is usually able to beat just about anyone. If you don't have the right style to beat Dong Young Kim, he will beat you. Like, he's not going to give up a fight to a Dom Waters or to a Tarek Saffiedine or to a John Hathaway or to an Eric Silva. Like, it just doesn't happen. You have to have the right style to beat him. I mean, it's worth wondering if Carlos Condit would have beat Dong Young Kim if he had not knocked him out with that ridiculous flying knee. You know? But Damian Maia and Tyron Woodley, Maia just jumped on him, so that doesn't even really count. But, like, he hasn't had to fight that many guys who can really go after him with a controlled wrestling game the way that Covington can and will. And he's a great wrestler. He's a great technical, he's got great judo. He's got great top game. He's very controlled. But he's willing to give guys positions. He's willing to give up a lot by being wild on the feet and being kind of crazy and letting guys get in on him and letting guys work. He gives people a lot to work with. And I think for Covington's relentlessness, that is going to play perfectly for him. Where even if he's not landing every takedown or controlling Dong Young Kim for a lot of time on the ground, Dong Young Kim is just going to keep giving him opportunities on the feet to be more controlling. And Covington's striking is more, they're both wild, funky strikers. They both have way too much of a love of just being powerful and going after guys to see what they can make happen. But I think Dong Young Kim he gives people more of himself when he does that. I mean, like, he opens much wider doors for people to go through than Covington does. Covington's more like, I'm going to throw some crazy spinning wheel kick and then a massive overhand, whereas Dong Young Kim is like, I'm just going to throw 3 spinning back elbows in a row.
The whirling dervish, Dong Hyun Kim.
Yeah. And so I'm picking Covington to pick up a tough, wrestle-controlled decision where Dong Young Kim just makes too many mistakes and gives up too much control. But this is going to be a battle. This is going to be a clinch battle where if Dong Young Kim, if his wrestling game, if his judo game takes over against Covington, he's going to win.
Yeah, I'm going to give what I think will be helpful context. It was certainly helpful context for me while I was researching this card. You can look at Dong Hyun Kim and say he's a guy who only loses to top 10 fighters. He only loses to the elite.
But he hasn't fight that many of the elite. So.
Right. It may in fact be better to say he only beats people who aren't top 10. Or more accurately, Dong Hyun Kim in I think like a 9-year UFC career has never fought a top 10 welterweight and beaten them. That is, like, he's never beaten a single top 10 welterweight. And so, like, people are looking at this and saying, oh, like, Covington's not ranked, so that might give you a feeling to think that, oh, Kim will beat him. But Kim has never faced an unranked fighter with Covington's style, not even close. He has never faced somebody with that much determination in the grappling. I think it really could actually help Kim if he comes out and goes crazy brawler from the beginning. Covington is still inexperienced. He's, he can be hit on the feet.
Kim will come out doing that. I don't think there's any question. I don't think he gives a shit.
Yeah. But it could also be a really big risk because he's going to give up his hips doing that. Yep. He's going to give up counters. Covington is still raw as a striker, but he's developing already a more technical striking game than Dong-Hyun Kim has ever had. The fact that, he went in there and was throwing bombs and maybe getting a little reckless, a little too heated, but the fact that he did that successfully against Brian Barberena, like winning pretty much every striking exchange in addition to controlling him on the ground, that says a lot to me. Barberena is a very tough cat. He's durable. He doesn't give up. He's well conditioned, and he's a really good combination puncher in the pocket and dangerous in the clinch. And he kept getting up, and Covington just kept getting him down. That really speaks to what I think is probably more than any technical skill Covington's biggest advantage, which is his stamina, because he is tireless. He hit 12 takedowns on Brian Barberena, landed like 70 shots, fought at a crazy pace, and with high energy techniques. All those takedowns, all that top control, all the scrambling, didn't look remotely tired at the end of the fight. And that has never been the case for Dong-Hyun Kim. We can go back even to the beginning of his UFC run and remember that Matt Brown beat the shit out of him in the third round of their fight because Kim was exhausted, even though all he really got to do in the first two was just hold Matt Brown down. That was like pre-submission savvy Matt Brown, where he could just be controlled on his back. And that's what happened, and that gassed Kim out. And he gassed out in his fight with Eric Silva. Silva gassed too, but like you could say Kim was very lucky to land that big shot when he did, because both guys were dead tired. And we've just seen that from him in too many fights to expect that he can go 3 hard rounds with Covington constantly pressing the attack. So I think Covington's going to wear Kim down, have a tough first round, but probably win a very strong third.
Yeah.
And I'm taking Colby Covington by decision.
Yeah. The approach, I think, I don't think Dong-Hyun Kim can stop himself from fighting the way he does. And I think the style he fights just gives Covington too much to work with. It would have to, like I say, it would have to end up being a case where Covington drives him into the fence where he expects to have a lot of success. And Dong-Hyun Kim's judo game just absolutely swamps him. That would happen.
And I'd be surprised. If it happened, I would be surprised, because I think Covington's wrestling is just on the whole a little stronger and more consistent than Kim's judo.
Yeah, his wrestling game is deep and technical and really complicated in a way that a lot of fighters who even are good counter wrestlers aren't able to keep up with what Colby Covington is doing as an offensive wrestler.
We're on the verge of a new era, I think, man, of like crazy, relentless, fast-paced wrestlers. And in this division alone, we have 2 up-and-comers now. If Covington gets a win here, he'll be probably a top 10 fighter. And then you've got him and Kamaru Usman, 2 really dangerous athletic guys with that style that nobody seems able to stop them, Covington had that prospect loss to Warley Alves, but nothing that really makes you worry about his career prospects. Otherwise, he's looked very, very good in his career.
Yeah, I mean, getting guillotined in the first round by Warley Alves is no shame.
It's a prospect loss. It happens. He learned a lesson from it. He left his neck out there a little too recklessly, and his game has developed more fully since.
So I'm actually surprised then to see Colby Covington. Colby Covington is a big favorite. He opened at -195, dropped down to -290, 300, 330 even, went back up to -210, leveled off for a while, and has had another big drop and is now at -325. So
it's a little strange.
He's way out ahead there. Dong-Hyun Kim opened at +155, jumped up to +250, 260, dropped down, right back down to +170, and then jumped back up eventually and is now up at +253. So I think that's wider than it should be a little. I mean, Dong-Hyun Kim is really hard to beat. And you can even argue that all 3 of his UFC losses have been kind of fluky. Like, your mic just cut out.
Am I back?
Yep.
Yeah, they have been. They've all been like very unexpected results.
Yeah, it's Carlos Condit knocking him out with the flying knee, Damian Maia jumping on him and him having a muscle spasm, TKO, and then him spinning into Tyron Woodley's fist and getting clubbered by it.
Now you could say he's a guy who gives the opportunities for those kinds of finishes.
Yeah, he gives those opportunities, but in any fight that has gone on longer than basically a minute, I mean, the Condit one was 3, but any fight that has gone on longer than a minute, he has won.
Yeah.
Any fight.
Yeah.
In his whole career. Except for
So
he had two draws, he had no contest against Carl Parisian, where Carl Parisian failed the drug test, and that was back in the core days of drugged up heat. And then a draw against Hidehiko Hasegawa, but
I think Covington should be favored here. I think he is the more likely guy to get the win. We both picked him, but maybe around minus 150, 180. 300 seems a little wide for a guy as experienced as Kim.
For guys experienced as Kim, who finishes fights, it's not like Dong Young Kim doesn't finish fights. He knocked out Dom Waters. He submitted Josh Berkman. He knocked out John Hathaway with one of the most brutal KOs we've ever seen. Knocked out Eric Silva. Like that, his wild style leads him into finishes. And he has literally never lost a fight that has gone longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah,
so
although he has lost his fair share of third rounds, which makes that statistic a little weird.
It is. So I am picking Covington, but the odds here seem really skewed.
Is there a line on Covington by decision?
Covington by decision is minus 122.
If you're going to bet on Covington, that seems fairly likely. Yeah, he wins by decision. Kim is a very tough guy. Covington's not a knockout puncher. Norris, not much of a submission threat either.
Yep.
So I think a Covington decision is a pretty likely bet.
See, what's Kim? Well, Kim inside the distance. Let's see what that is. Is plus 574.
I'm not expecting it, but those are certainly tempting odds.
Yeah. It could be the kind of thing where we see another hole in Covington's sub defense,
Yeah, could be.
All right, that brings us to the co-main event: Andrei Arlovski, Marcin Tybura. Let's see, is this you or me? I've forgotten now. This is you.
Okay. Well, this is it's only right that I get to talk about this because this is my Gomi fight. This is the one that bums me out. Arlovski was one of the first just cool, mean-looking dudes who I got into first. But before I was really even an MMA fan, I was like, oh, this Andrei Arlovski guy. And weirdly, it was right around the time that he was going through that big knockout streak. But it kind of gave me I was rooting for a comeback. So it felt really good when I started to see Arlovski make his way back into, the realm of the ranked heavyweights. And I think he's still more or less the same guy he was then. Arlovski has changed very little over the course of his career. He's still very fast. He's still extremely powerful. He still gets knocked out whenever anyone with power touches.
Oh, we lost him briefly. I was going to say, whenever anyone with power touches his chin, he's still... Okay, Sorry. Go on. Oh, Jesus.
That was just my regularly scheduled call drop. Arlovski, fragile, powerful, fast. That is the guy he has always been, and it's pretty much still the guy he is. And I don't honestly even see any reason in all of his recent knockouts to say that he takes a shot any less well than he used to. It's just that Arlovski is now and kind of has always been a fighter who, when he faces a really explosive, athletic striker, he's likely to get KO'd. And Francis Ngannou and who was the other guy who knocked him out? Stipe Miocic. Yeah. Two really powerful, athletic hitters. And that's the kind of fight that Arlovski doesn't do well in. By that metric, he has a much better shot here. Tybura is a finisher, but he's not the same kind of explosive power puncher and is also a lot more hittable himself. Arlovski, good counter right hand. His defense has improved a bit in recent years, which would be very handy for him here. And Tybura's defense has improved in the sense that he's not as easy to hit. Even since his first UFC fight, he's harder to hit now. but in weird ways where he'll like lean away, get out of position, get his, his feet will no longer be under his body. He'll duck down and take his eyes off of his opponent. They're the kinds of reactions that if Arlovski flurries, comes in with like a double right hand, then he could definitely catch Tybura hard on the second right hand. But if it comes down to both guys having the chances to land shots on each other, then it comes down to chin. And Tybura is extremely durable. This is probably the hardest puncher he's faced, but he is very, very tough.
He's never been knocked out.
Yeah, never been knocked out. I think he got an injury TKO at one point.
He got a cut stoppage, yeah.
Right. Never been knocked out, rarely even been hurt, despite the fact that he's always been fairly hittable. So he's very tough. And we can't say that about Arlovski. And I think what's going to happen here is that Arlovski is probably going to be a little reluctant, a little cautious, and that Tybura is going to get hit a few times early on counters, but will start to sort of put his combinations together. Once that happens, I expect Tybura to start snaking in some of those head kicks and awkward, long, wide punches and clipping Arlovski. I don't know that he will be able to knock him out, even if it is Andrei Arlovski. That's not necessarily Tybura's game, but I have a feeling he's just going to catch him with something really sneaky in like the second or third round. So I'm going with Tybura by second round TKO.
Yeah, I mean, Tybura has become a much better knockout fighter as his game has gone on. His boxing has taken a major leap forward in the UFC. Like he's very much he's the early stages of leechifying.
Yeah, he went he went to a new boxing camp, a new coach or a new camp, I believe, after that loss to Tim Johnson, and it has definitely shown.
Yeah, because he came up as another guy who used to grapple all the time and wrestle all the time, and that was what he did. He would box in little fits. He had a poor wrestling game. He would just kind of hold guys against the fence and slow the fight into this slog where eventually he could drag it down to the mat, or he'd let them take him down, and then he was a back take artist at heavyweight, which, the hell.
He has a few of those really unreliable submissions. I think he has like a keyed lock or something. The ones that miraculously stop happening once you get to the UFC.
Yeah, he had several TKOs by retirement where he was just fighting dudes who were so out of shape they couldn't keep up with him. And but he's tough as shit, and his boxing has turned a corner, and I think that at some point he's going to knock Arlovski out. Just he's too tough, and he's improving his hands too quickly for me to think that Arlovski stands in and wins this effectively.
And while Arlovski's speed and when he really commits and covers distance, that can still make him surprise on the stretch. Because as we've noted many times before, Andrei Arlovski is basically just a rocket-powered right hand. After all these years, all this experience, he still rarely throws anything other than a right hand.
Yeah, so I'm picking Tybura as well. The durability, the increased boxing craft, it'll get it done for him sooner or later. He's the favorite opening at -190, dropping down to -245, now at -247. Arlovski opening at +150, rising up to +200, now +199. That all feels pretty spot on for me. It could be a little closer, maybe, but not really. I mean, I think that you have a heavyweight that is nearly impossible to KO so far in his career, and a heavyweight who is very easy to KO since forever.
Yeah,
and it's just a bad recipe for Arlovski.
But it is also it is the best chance Arlovski has to assert himself as a gatekeeper. Like we've seen now, he's not hanging with the elite prospects. He's not hanging with the top of the division. Although his fights with, his fight with Josh Burnett was certainly back and forth.
Yep.
Likewise with the Overeem fight, he had some moments in that. But I think we basically see that his bar has been set at that level, but he could still be a very good gatekeeper. He's got some craft. He's very dangerous and still has a passion for fighting. So this is certainly the most winnable, I think, of his last few fights.
Yeah, which is why I think it could stand to be a little closer than it is, but not a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. Are there any? Let's see. Tybura by KO is minus 108. Arlovski by TKO KO is plus 445. And fight doesn't go to decision is minus 285.
Well, I'm going to fall back on your trusty don't bet on heavyweights rule and avoid this one.
Yeah, that would be my rule. Don't bet on this fight. It's a heavyweight fight. That brings us to Bethe Correia versus Holly Holm. Now, this is... I have to keep doing this because it's Bethe Correia and she's never going to catch a break, a real break. But Bethe Correia is way better than she gets credit for.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be hard for her not to be because she's basically thought of as the worst fighter in the UFC.
Yeah.
And she is well beyond the worst fighter in the UFC. Like, I remember somebody the other day on Twitter was talking about this fight, and they're like, I wouldn't necessarily pick Holly Holm clearly to beat Kylan Curran. And somebody said, yeah, but this isn't Curran, it's Correia. And it's like,
he is a way better fighter than Curran.
Way better. Way
I mean, you
better.
can see it. Look at her fights. You can see her results. Everybody, this. I don't know why a quick loss to Ronda Rousey is the albatross hanging around her neck when that doesn't seem to have affected all the other women that Ronda Rousey just destroyed in the first minute. I don't get it.
And
I think
otherwise,
it was because
close loss to Raquel Pennington, and that's it.
Yeah, a good and generally, like, I know I'm the middleweight guy. I like shitty fights, but I think Correia's fights are usually pretty scrappy. Like they're good watching. They're never like hugely action packed because she's not very powerful, and most of her opponents aren't. The consequences aren't huge, but she pushes a pace. She throws combinations. She's making steady improvements, and I will maintain. Because here's the thing, Zane. After that fight with Marion Renault, I was like, that was a great fight. Let's see it again, because it was a weird result.
Yeah.
It was a draw.
Yep.
And people were like, oh, this is classic you. That was a good fight. That was a really good fight. It had huge momentum swings. Renault hurt Correia with a head kick. Correia put tons of punches and got takedowns in the early rounds. I thought it was a great fight. And yeah, Correia just gets way too much hate for what she does.
She was well on her way to beating Renault.
Yeah.
Now, that makes me a little sad here because you have two exact polar opposites.
Yeah.
Really, honestly.
The fighter who gets way too much credit versus the one who never gets enough.
You got the leggy, beautiful blonde who gets tons of credit for being a top shelf technical fighter and is really more of a superb athlete who puts out, who doesn't make many adjustments or really fight to her own abilities.
An athlete with a lot of experience and a
And then
process
on the other side,
which she is totally and forever tied.
Yeah. And then on the other side, you've got Bethe Correia, who is not the tall, beautiful, leggy blonde, and who is relatively inexperienced by comparison, and who has no athletic gifts at all, and fights way above her own abilities.
Yeah.
And so I really want Bethe Correia to win. And if this just sits as a 5-round pace-pushing decision, Correia may win.
Yeah,
she might.
She's got a shot.
She has a shot.
A good shot, by the way. Some people are looking at this and being like, oh, but like, how can you even do that? Holly Holmes lost her last 3. She almost lost to Rocky Pennington before she beat Ronda Rousey. People need to get it into their heads that Holly Holm, I like Holly. How can you not like her? She's just a very lovable person. She had one of the greatest moments we've ever seen in MMA, but she's just not usually a very exciting or even a very effective fighter.
Yeah.
She's just not.
And so Correia is like, she's the more likely fighter to adjust to what Holly's doing. Holm is very predictable. She always, people have pointed this out before. Holm has these habits that tell her strikes from a mile off. Because she likes to stay out at range and be this rangy kickboxer. but when she's actually going to punch, she lunges into the pocket.
Yeah.
And when she does that, she like makes steps and like rolls into the pocket so that everyone who fights her can see it coming, and most of them leave her punching air because they're not Ronda Rousey and they don't see somebody coming at them and think, oh, I better come at them harder with worse punches.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just, people talk a lot about her ki, which they can be a problem, but we see plenty of fighters, even boxers, who shout when they punch and it doesn't hurt them.
No, that's not the problem.
Rancis Barthélemy, a very good Cuban boxer, shouts when he punches. Not a problem. He's fine. It doesn't give away everything he does. The big problem for Holly Holm is she's just, like I said, she's totally tied to her style. I don't think there's any adjustment for her at this point. She's not really made any refinements that I've seen. She stands really heavy on her front foot. She leans way forward. So the only way for her to close more distance is to step towards you. And she does it really obviously.
Yep.
And you could just see it coming. It's why you would never expect such an experienced pro boxer to be so hittable. But if you are confident enough to stand there and throw as she comes in, you will hit Holly Holm. Valentina Shevchenko landed that counter right hook every time she threw it because Holm just kept giving her chin.
Ronda Rousey hit her a bunch.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't, Ronda Rousey is a much, much worse technical striker. Still
Ronda
landed
Rousey
a
hurt
lot
her.
of shots on Holly Holm.
Yeah, she hurt her with a left hook, actually. That's what prompted Holm to go for that reactive takedown.
So Correia will have opportunities. The problem here is, too, though, against a bigger, better, more well-schooled athlete in Germaine de Randamie, who was, frankly, mostly kind of pantsing Holm for a lot of that fight. Holm's relentlessness and her athleticism and her conditioning and her just, her ability to just keep going after it and occasionally actually change things up a little in ways that then totally shock opponents because they're like, wait, you're actually going to like do some like dirty boxing in the clinch or like throw something other than the same 1-2 kick combo?
Or go for a takedown. She did that against Germaine de Randamie.
Yeah. Those things just shock opponents. Holm still hurt de Randamie badly a couple times, especially late in that fight. And I don't think that Correia has the foot speed to make the reads she gets on Holm as valuable as it should be.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have the athleticism or durability that if Holm is catching her, that she'll be getting that she'll be able to really like stand in and take those shots.
Yeah.
Like we saw that again in the Renault fight where she was handling Renault for a lot of that fight. And then Renault came out and landed a head kick and it just floored her.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's foot slow. She's not a great athlete. She's going to be caught cold by stuff. She doesn't have the reaction time that other fighters have.
It's kind of a cruel twist because she sets up and executes her punches so much more cleanly than Holly Holm does. But she is almost just as hittable because she's kind of uncoordinated and very slow. Yeah.
So I'm picking Holly Holm, and because she is a better athlete. She's really well conditioned. She's going to go after it and be consistent in ways that I don't think that Correia has the athleticism to adjust to, even if she sees the adjustments. But I feel really shitty about it. And if Bethe Correia won, I would feel awesome about that.
Yeah, and again, I think she has a chance. People are really overlooking Correia, as they always do.
Yep.
But I more or less agree with your whole assessment. There's not a ton I can add to it, to be honest. I will say that Holm, she does throw herself into her strikes. It's just that by the time they get to the target, all the steam is gone because she doesn't maintain balance. She doesn't move forward technically as she throws, and she doesn't really sit down on her punches. But if you run into them, we saw that in the Rousey fight. We saw it in the Germaine de Randamie fight, that one moment when de Randamie came in hard and Holm just met her with the left hand, she hurt her badly.
Yep.
And she's also got a very dangerous left high kick. If this fight plays out at range, I think the kicks, even if only 1 out of every 10 that Holm throws actually lands, that kind of thing will allow her to sort of just pick up rounds, sort of like she did against Miesha Tate.
Yep.
And if Correia does what I think she'll do and she starts pressuring, while that will give her opportunities, and I think she can do that to like force attacks and counter Holm's counters and have some success doing that, it will also give Holm the chance to actually hurt her with a punch.
Yep.
If Correia is coming forward. So I think Correia is just a little too, weirdly, even though like good boxers have been the death of Holly Holm in MMA, even more ironically is the fact that Correia is a pretty technical boxer who is getting better with each fight. Technique, power, speed, all those things are improving bit by bit. But I think that may be the problem for here because she's so slow on her feet.
Yeah.
And if she's just trying to throw those short little arms at Holly Holm, who's standing like 6 feet away, I think we're going to be in for a fairly uneventful win by Holly Holm.
It may even end up being a TKO or like, it may be uneventful, but except for a couple of moments of Bethe getting hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. Yeah. And there'll probably be a couple moments where Bethe lands a big combination. Probably won't hurt Holm, but, like both women have their moments. It's just, I think the fight would have to be too consistent in Bethe's direction. Like there are just too many things against her for a fighter who lacks power and lacks speed to make the most of the exchanges. So, Holm by decision.
Odds on Holm opened at -350 are now out to -583. Correia opened at +250 out to +416.
Obviously far too wide. I mean,
obviously far too wide.
0-3 in her last 3, and I don't know who has Holly Holm beaten other than Ronda Rousey. That is a really convincing testament to her abilities in MMA.
It would be Marion Renault and Raquel Pennington, and Pennington's improved a lot, and Renault is sort of like Holm in that, except that Renault is a great athlete who just doesn't have a game.
Yeah, and again, neither of those fights were particularly convincing because they were both like Holm didn't really look good in either of them.
Yep,
especially not the Rocky Pennington fight.
Yeah, well, in the Renault fight, she just kind of stayed away from her. It was like you had a fighter in front of her that did not want to kickbox at all, and Holm just was like out there kind of leaving, just skating through the fight. Yeah. So, she's never really had a really hard fight where she has convincingly shown up and like been dominant, other than that Ronda Rousey fight, which is, as we've learned, a testament to Ronda Rousey's own sort of Achilles heel.
Yeah.
Odds are too wide. Still wouldn't bet on Bethe, but if this fight, if Holm doesn't hurt her, this fight could be funky and close. That's the thing. If Bethe doesn't get hurt, she is going to make the fight messy and do as well as she can in it.
Yeah, I hope she does. Like again, she's an overachiever. Holm, at least in MMA, has been a pretty profound underachiever. It would be a bit of a fairy tale ending if Bethe got the win here, but I also won't be too sad. The contrarian.
She's a good person.
Yeah, she's great. She's like her post-fight speech after beating Ronda Rousey is like the most charming moment I've ever experienced watching someone talking on the microphone in the cage. But like the contrarian in me would really like to just shout and laugh at everyone who hates on Bethe Correia for no reason that I can ascertain. But it seems like it'll be a tough test for her to consistently pick up rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually just as just to make a point better. I got to double check this, but yeah, Bethe Correia's UFC record, her bantamweight record is kind of better than Jermaine Durandamy's.
Yeah, it's kind of better than Holly Holm's if you remove the Ronda Rousey fights.
Yeah, like Durandamy had her featherweight win over Holly Holm, but there's a reason that she's clinging to the edges of the top 50 of the top 10 at bantamweight. She's not done that well there. So
So
it is
now
what
on to the main event: Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor.
that's right. All right. On that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSam. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. Give us a like over on YouTube. That's the thumbs up thing. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. That all helps us a lot. We will be back next week for UFC Oklahoma City, Chiesa versus Lee, which actually looks like a pretty fun card on paper, other than having to watch BJ Penn fight Dennis Seaver and break that down.
Hey, if BJ Penn's got a fight still, then that is the kind of fight he should be getting.
No, yeah, it's true. All right. Well, on that note, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.